Amphenol's interconnect solutions have helped drive the future of electronics for 75 years. This is our story, the continuum of past, present, and future. Arthur J. Schmidt, Amphenol's founder and leader for 32 years, forged the core values and strategies that sustained our company in the early years and to this day drive Amphenol's continued success.
Arthur was one of a kind.
He was a very gracious person. He was very considerate and easy to talk to.
He didn't act superior. I mean, he acted like he was one of the rest of the crowd.
He liked to be straightforward on everything. Say it the way you see it and how it is.
Arthur was not very patient with the status quo in life. For instance, he only spent 2 years in high school because it wasn't challenging enough for him. And so he set about doing the things he was interested in. He was an inventor at heart. He's very inventive, and he liked to do things, make things. He made an airplane out of things like baling wire and chewing gum, we would say, and flew it. I think he was 17 at the time. He then proceeded to find an interest in a very unique kind of an automobile, namely one that was propeller driven. And so he made this automobile with a propeller and an engine out in front, and he's sitting behind this propeller doing 55 miles an hour when the top speed of the Ford Model A's or whatever was about 15 or 20 miles an hour.
In 1916, Schmidt joined the Army, where he became fascinated with the new communications phenomenon, radio. By the early 1930s, the vacuum tube had helped demand for radios spread through the general population. But production capacity was limited because bakelite, a new plastic insulating material that formed the part of the cabinet receiving the tubes, was brittle and difficult to work. Schmidt could see that insulating plastics would play a key role in the expanding electronics industry, and his creative mind went to work on solving the manufacturing issues with bakelite. In August, he solved the molding challenges and hit his first major invention, the molded radio socket.
The company was formed in 1932 as American Phenolic Corporation. And it was then manufacturing connecting devices made out of the phenolic material.
He rented apartments, he rented garages, and started producing until he moved to, that was around Van Buren in Chicago. And then he acquired property in Cicero on 54th Avenue.
The next decade saw steady growth through invention as Schmidt continued his focus on building for the future of electronics. His approach was consistent and simple. Focus on the emerging interconnect needs of the high-growth electronics market and respond rapidly with quality solutions. Responding to market demand, in 1936 Schmidt introduced two new products. The 75 series uniform microphone connectors became the standard in the recording industry, and the lock-in socket was an improvement on Schmidt's radio tube socket that offered easier installation for radio manufacturers.
Most of the new products were done, in those days anyway, were done at the request of customers. In other words, a customer would say, I need a connector that fits this requirement.
RCA placed an order for 10,000 lock-in sockets per day with delivery scheduled to begin in 30 days. The company had a molding press with a capacity of only 250 sockets per day. Schmidt, determined to satisfy customer requirements, devised a radically new method for making mold cavities and met the production schedule.
He was bigger than life. I mean, he was Amphenol in those days. He would take care of customers when they came in and, you know, get them in the conference room, and he would sell them as well as anybody would sell them.
Well, we were mostly contained there at 1830 South 54th Avenue in one building. And then it got so that business got so good that we had to start branching out into different branches.
Amphenol during those early years made everything themselves, all the way from molding the product to stamping the contacts to plating the contacts and the shells and everything else. So it was pretty much an in-house approach to life.
World War II solidly established Amphenol as a premier technology-driven connector and cable company. Amphenol developed solutions to meet high performance and interchangeability requirements for emerging military applications.
Connectors were starting to operate at 10,000 feet or above, and that was a new breakthrough.
There was a need also for coaxial cable for aircraft applications. There was a need for more sophisticated and rugged connecting devices, and that was the birth of the so-called AN connectors.
The 5015 AN connector was so widely used it became known to flight maintenance crews as the Amphenol. During the war, Amphenol produced over 60% of all connectors used by the aircraft industry and virtually all of the coaxial cable used in military aircraft. America's flagship bomber, the B-29 Super Fortress, contained over 1,600 connectors. Amphenol's designs facilitated fast maintenance and repair by permitting an entire wing to be removed without rewiring, and its breakthrough solid dielectric coax cable allowed aircraft to fly at altitudes over 30,000 feet without compromising critical electronics equipment. Amphenol's Cicero, Illinois facility was running round the clock, and staffing had increased tenfold to support wartime production.
Well, by the time I got there, they still had quite a few. Remember, this was in '42. They had quite a good employment. I mean, it was up. I think I'm thinking it was around 2,500 by the end of the war, but it was up pretty high by the time I got there too. But we still were hiring all the time.
During the war years, Schmidt solidified the core management team that would drive the company's development for the next 2 decades. William Rouse would lead international expansion, and Kurt Klosterman's product development and engineering innovations would play a key role in the company's expansion. When military sales dropped at the end of the war from $39 million to under $5 million, the company was already positioned to take advantage of market opportunities created by the emerging electronics applications and telephony, which was evolving in both breadth and complexity.
Kurt Klosterman was very instrumental in developing the Blue Ribbon connector line, which became the Bell System standard by way of Bell Labs and Western Electric.
Telephone industry started buying 26 series, and then that led into the 57 series connectors that we had.
Responding to the requirements of its customers in the early consumer electronics market, Amphenol also focused its product development efforts on another new emerging electronics application: television.
And of course the antenna line right after the war. I mean, everybody was hanging antennas out their windows, you know.
Every house in Chicago had one of those. So dipole antenna up on the roof. They were solid. They don't make them like they make antennas now, which is pretty flimsy.
Of course, you had to hook up the antenna to the TV set inside, and that's where the twin lead line cable came into being.
Amphenol's experience with military aircraft applications positioned the company as a key supplier for the commercial aircraft industry at a time when passenger jets were taking to the skies.
You know, the planes start enlarging, and from the DC-3s, and it seemed like we got into more of that.
The requirements for commercial aircraft were pretty much the same as the military aircraft. When they started building the jet, the 707, the product that was put on board, that one was the 26500 connector. That was a product that Amphenol had developed specifically for the military, but sold it into the commercial aviation business.
As the company celebrated its 25th anniversary in 1957, it was at a crossroads. Continued growth required an infusion of capital, and Schmidt listed the company on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol APL. In order to reflect the now broadening scope of its business, the name was changed to Amphenol Electronics Corporation. Later that same year, Amphenol purchased Danbury Knudsen, the predecessor of today's RF and microwave division. The new RF connectors and Amphenol's core products benefited from a new distribution channel pioneered by Bill Rouse in early 1958.
He came up basically with a good format for an industrial distribution program, which was not easy for him to sell to Mr. Schmidt or to the sales organization which was selling to the manufacturers, OEMs. But it turned out he was able to sell it, and probably on the basis if it doesn't work, you know, we'll go back. But it did work, and it was great, and the distributors loved Amphenol because we were a leader in coming up with a program and a policy which really changed the role that they played in distribution.
The RF connectors, we sold millions of them. I don't know where all those 83 1SPs went to, but we sure put a lot of them out in the field.
In December 1958, Amphenol took a major step in its continuing expansion efforts when it merged with the G.W. Borg Corporation.
George W. Borg was a very good friend of Mr. Schmidt's, and of course Mr. Borg's health was getting bad, and he, I think, talked to A.J. to see about combining with his company. That's how he became Amphenol Borg.
The George Borg Corporation had three different divisions, if you will. It had an automobile clock division, which is really what started that company, because that was tied to George Borg's background.
There was the Borg Fabric division that put out the man-made fur for fur coats.
Right at that point, there was a fashion trend towards imitation fur coats, and that's what took that thing off. Sucked in a lot of money building new plants here and there. It had a potentiometer division. We made potentiometers in Janesville. And that was the interest to Amphenol on the basis of another component which could be sold heavily through distribution.
In 1964, Arthur Schmidt retired. Over the course of 32 years, he had built the company from a loft workshop with 2 employees into a multifaceted international company. Amphenol Borg employed 6,800 people in 10 U.S. divisions and 8 foreign subsidiaries.
A.J. Schmidt was a great person. He's in the history of Amphenol and Chicagoland well remembered and honored. He will be remembered by your children and children's children.
Matthew Devine succeeded Schmidt as Amphenol's president and brought a new style of management to the company.
His demeanor was very definitely methodical, step by step by step by step, just the opposite of Arthur Schmidt, who was more instantaneous and let's do something.
Matthew Devine appointed Rouse to lead a major expansion of Amphenol's international operations beyond the early subsidiaries established in Canada and the United Kingdom.
The first meaningful move in Japan was by way of joint venture with Nippon Telephone Telegraph and Fujikura Cable. You could not have foreign ownership in the majority in your business. Bill Rouse's approach to life was, okay, we'll find at least 2 other partners, and they can have 33% each, but we'll have 34%. And that's how we moved into Japan and India and so on. Heilbronn was the acquisition of Amphenol Tuchel, and Dysonhofen was the original Amphenol plant in Germany. I closed that one and combined the two.
Somebody had the idea to buy a company that was existing in Heilbronn. And that company was founded by a maniac of these products, actually a very well-known sir, an inventor of new products, Mr. Tuchel. This was the company where we had 500 or 600 people at that time already, because we bought that company. And there, that was where the music played. So when I was called from Belgium to Germany, I was given a choice to go to Munich or to go to Heilbronn. When I had visited all the places in Germany, I knew where I had to live. That was not Munich. Not because it wasn't a nice town, quite on the contrary, but the music played in Heilbronn.
In addition to expanding internationally, Amphenol entered the computer market with the acquisition of Cadre Industries in Endicott, New York, which would evolve into Amphenol Interconnect Products.
Did most of their business with IBM, and then we began to build that business into more areas around the country.
We tried to get into the CB business and develop a CB radio, and we set up a repair center out in the distribution center. One of the items was a wireless microphone that was developed by Cadre, and we were marketing that too.
Due to its strong earnings in 1967, Amphenol Borg had become a takeover target. To avoid a hostile takeover by Solutron, a manufacturer of transistors and semiconductors, Amphenol Borg merged with the Bunker-Ramo Corporation, an electronic systems company which produced teleregisters and ticker boards.
And we came within that much, within days of being called Bunker-Ramo connectors. And Amphenol would go. I mean, that was horrendous. We couldn't even contemplate it.
I reported to John Buchholz then. John Buchholz was the top Amphenol guy. They had a division, Amphenol division, and Bunker-Ramo, you know, had all these different divisions. Amphenol was only one division of the Bunker-Ramo.
George Trimble, the president at that time, went to a service dinner, an employee service dinner, and he came back and he said, I didn't see Bunker-Ramo mentioned one time. I didn't hear it. It was all Amphenol.
If you wanted to draw a picture of a chief executive officer, it wouldn't be George Trimble. He was not outgoing. He was a very private person. He was an engineer's engineer.
Rouse and Frank Leach were good guys. They developed Amphenol to be #1 and so on with a lot of other managers. But then we got the Bunker-Ramo people, and that's really when the slide started. And I think they were new boys to the industry, and they did business in a different way, and a good way wasn't found forward. The right way wasn't found forward.
I think one of the things that bothered the Amphenol people was that they felt that they were somewhat of a cash cow, and that their profits were being taken and spread into different areas of the business rather than their own. And that may have been true, because the research and development was not done as much, or it didn't result in as many improvements as they might have if they really had emphasized that area.
They were in the ticker tape business, but they wanted now to be in a much larger factor in the individual computers that now were taking place of the big ticker boards. And they didn't have enough money to fund that.
When Bunker-Ramo took over, I just sort of lost interest. I got tired of seeing people, after we worked so hard for that company, seeing people sitting around reading magazines and stuff, and I thought, forget it. It wasn't worth doing for some reason. It wasn't worth working for anymore.
Folks had a tough time finally saying we're going to be one company, but they came around in time, although they continued to be very proud of their Amphenol heritage.
At the time, in the mid-70s, there were 5 companies that were really involved in the connector business. And in the truth, back then, it wasn't even what I would call, the age of digitalization did not yet happen. We were still in what I'd call electrical, electromechanical.
At the time, Amphenol then was the largest connector company in the world, by far. It had a couple of interesting divisions. One was a clock company up in Delavan, Wisconsin, where they actually made 70% of the world's electromechanical clocks, and did an enormous profit margin with those clocks. Unfortunately, the technology caught up with them.
The analog clock was being replaced by the digital clock.
It became obvious to me as Vice President of Corporate Development that we weren't in a position to keep up with the technology. So I proposed to George Trimble, then the President, that we had to sell the instrument division, that it was called. And he agreed. So I took care of the clock business. Another interesting business that they had was board textiles. Tremendous technology and knitting capability.
Imitate the zebra, imitate the cat, imitate this or that. Well, that all went too far and nobody wanted it. It had to close down. Nobody wanted artificial fur. The ladies, they would look at it. It had to be the real beast.
We were a little rich company, and then all of a sudden these people are saying, well, let's split it here and then let's diversify, and then all of a sudden we were all over the place losing money.
While the North American divisions of Amphenol declined in performance, the European operations continued to embrace Amphenol's core management values.
My counterpart on the North America brought in all new people from other companies, non-component companies, and tried to run it as a systems business. Connector business is not a systems business, and you don't run it that way. I basically took the old Amphenol people and instilled an old Amphenol philosophy. They brought two things. One was a part of the Amphenol mystique, which probably had its genesis with Arthur Schmidt. The other thing that they brought was the understanding and knowledge of the product, the customer, the people, particularly the people.
By 1980, after selling the unprofitable Borg product lines, Bunker Ramo earned $27.3 million, mostly from its Amphenol group. With its increasing profitability and low debt load due to years of minimal investment, Bunker Ramo had become a takeover target.
Well, Martin Marietta decided that they were going to put their large block of stock that they had in Bunker Ramo up for sale, put it on the market, put it into play.
So it happened. One time, Hennessy, then Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Allied Chemical, came in. Shortly after that, the auditors came in. We're looking at the books and everything else. And then the third time, Hennessy came back down and said that there was going to be an acquisition, and told the management team not to be concerned, because the way they acquired people, you know, they left management in place, which is, looking back, kind of funny, because nobody had left.
I was the first of the 12 officers to leave, and 18 months later, everybody was gone, or at least all the 12 officers were gone.
The reason Allied bought us was to start a new division, an electronics division.
The first thing I did was make an assessment of Amphenol, and that took several months to do a thorough assessment. What was lacking mainly was an aggressive approach to industry marketing. There were 10,000 separate part numbers at Amphenol, and no one could tell me which ones contributed to profit. The consolidation plan that took us from 15 factories in the United States to 7 that would then yield a $12 million annual savings was difficult. But these factories were basically inefficient. Some of them had equipment that was suitable for an injection molding museum, and there was really a need for a new chapter in Amphenol's life.
Cicero was something else. That's where they made the industrial connectors. You used to go into the molding shop and they were steam driven. And they had all these guys stripped to the waist. Steam everywhere, heat, temperature, unbelievable.
In 1982, Allied merged Spectra strip cable into Amphenol. The following year, Allied acquired Bendix Corporation, a $4 billion diversified manufacturer, and Amphenol assumed management of Bendix's electrical components division. Phil Arneson appointed Alan Stanley, general manager of Amphenol Limited, to manage the blend of the best integration of Amphenol and Bendix connectors.
So you had these two enemies, Bendix connectors out of Sydney, New York, and Amphenol out of Chicago. And so you had to somehow try and get the best out of both of them, which is quite difficult because the camps were polarized, you can imagine.
Amphenol was a world-recognized name. Bendix was a well-recognized product and name. SpectraStrip was well-recognized. And Amphenol was smart enough to keep the brand recognition and build in a methodology and infrastructure that would allow us to literally blend all those excellent brand names into a unified approach through the marketing and operations of the teams to address the market.
The military aerospace integration was part of Allied's broader restructuring initiative. Martin Luffler was brought over from Dole, France to lead further expansion of Amphenol's international business, and Bob Price directed a corporate effort to catch up on technology investment.
We acquired Teldix in Germany, we acquired Socapex in France, and created really a new company called Nippon Interconnect. We started up a major technology center in Lisle. It was primarily a technology focus at the corporate level, and we tried not to replace individual initiative at the divisional level.
By 1986, Allied made the strategic decision to exit its component businesses.
We went through the period where American corporations were having share buybacks. So they had to raise some money so they could increase the dividends and so on, or the yield. And lo and behold, they looked at chemicals, they couldn't sell that. They looked at automotive, they couldn't sell that. They looked at electronics, and guess what? They could sell that. So we were put on the block, the whole lot, $2 billion worth.
The 1980s saw a buildup of inefficiencies in U.S. corporations. The leveraged buyout financial model became the craze on Wall Street, and Amphenol was acquired in 1987 by LPL Investment Group on the promise of a major restructuring. LPL was a family investment group based in Wallingford, Connecticut, who already owned Times Fiber Communications, a leading manufacturer of coaxial cable for the cable television industry. LPL's founder, Larry DeGeorge, saw the potential inherent in Amphenol and would play a key role in restoring its profitability.
LPL Group is a small group of people who are skilled at both financing, purchasing of companies that we wish to buy based on their restructured cash flow. We looked around for companies which had a very fine brand recognition within their markets, but were unable to capitalize on that brand recognition and make any money.
Larry DeGeorge came to Merrill Lynch to hire the firm to represent him in the second stage of the auction process. When you listened to Larry and you went through the restructure plan, it looked sound. I'll never forget, you know, he told you, look, I'm 74 years old, you don't get many opportunities like this, and I want it. And he got it. Larry had the vision to see how to do things better and more cost-effective in a very short amount of time.
I mean, headquarters at Amphenol in the old days in Oak Brook, just fantastic. Their own chef, and great big cigars on the table, they take by the handful, and money was no expense at that level. No problem at that level. They spent a huge amount of money.
Larry did something I still say today only 1 out of 1,000 connector executives could pull off. There were 400 people in the headquarters in Lisle, Illinois, suburb of Chicago, when Larry took over the company, and he downsized to only 5 people. That is unbelievable.
Amphenol needed a dynamic leader. Within the company, there was a man who had been with Amphenol for many, many years. He knew every facet of every interconnect operation within Amphenol, Dr. Martin Loeffler.
Amphenol has been part of a conglomerate for many years. The Amphenol management was not always fully knowledgeable of or certainly not in control of, whether the Amphenol business as a whole or in part was still a strategic focus within this conglomerate. That fundamentally changed when LPL acquired Amphenol. Amphenol became the first and only priority. The priority at the beginning was certainly more financial of nature due to the heavy debt load following the leverage buyout.
I remember very well we had two subordinated debt issues of significance. One was 15%, the other was 16.5%. You know, there's the saying that debt is a great discipline. There's a lot of truth to that. And it reinforced, what it did, it reinforced just a lot of good business practices. I mean, it made a necessity out of what just good business practices of managing cash flow, the importance of cash flow, the expense control, inventory control, and so those being good practices became a necessity because of our financial situation.
The first thing we focused on was eliminating excess layers of management that really did very little to contribute to productivity or value creation within the company. Although probably even more important than that was restructuring the structural organization in the company away from a matrix organization with many centralized functions into separate P&L centers, and that allowed us to establish accountability for the profitability.
You had to sit down. You were a manager. You had to sit down on a monthly basis. You didn't want to miss your numbers. Right? You had to justify why you were spending every dollar and where your next dollar was coming from.
The term accountability brought about a whole new meaning. I mean, we all thought we understood what accountability was at the time, and I smile when I think of it, but we really didn't know how to spell accountability.
It's these monthly meetings with managers where everybody is accountable. Nothing slips.
We also took what was a centralized sales force in Amphenol prior to the acquisition, eliminated the centralized sales force without letting go any of the salespeople, but reassigning those salespeople to each of the newly created profit and loss centers, so that each general manager of those centers would have complete control of their own destiny, both for manufacturing as well as marketing and sales.
While these restructuring efforts were underway, the core military aerospace market softened, and combined with the heavy debt load, Amphenol faced severe financial challenges.
We went along for some period of just having to live almost on a month-to-month basis of managing the cash flow. So there were elements of the business that were doing well, and we muddled through. And looking back, it actually was an exciting time because there was a tremendous challenge of that, and you're really fighting your way through a lot of difficulties.
To maximize margin was ingrained in the minds of all of the Amphenol managers to a greater degree than ever before in the history of the company.
In 1991, Amphenol completed an initial public offering, and with reduced debt and substantially increased equity base, the company had a clear focus on growth and improving profitability. Shortly thereafter, Amphenol merged with its sister division, Times Fiber Communications, further strengthening the company's financial footing and strategic position.
Martin and I participated in what most would regard as one of the longest road shows in investment history.
There wasn't an overwhelming response from institutions. Again, people weren't as exposed to the end markets that Amphenol was involved in.
One of the things of going public and being the registration statement and being a public company, we have to write documents to describe the company. And my recollection of that, what really came out, was it was very hard to describe Amphenol.
Within the military market, Amphenol had a very good understanding of the applications where our products were used. Outside of that market, our understanding was much more limited. because the majority of these products, mostly commodities in nature, were sold primarily through distribution. We started a major undertaking to get closer to our customers, to get closer to the engineering departments of the major manufacturers across many segments of the growing electronic markets.
As they grew into some of these newer markets, you have to get involved early in the design phase with the customer. You know, your relationships with the engineering departments is critical as far as, you know, who the customer is going to select to be their partners. And as Amphenol has continued to grow in non-military aerospace area, the percentage of business on a direct basis has increased dramatically because of these relationships.
We started to develop products for the specific applications that were used in the next generation products of our customers. That brought significant value to our customers and helped Amphenol to improve its profitability. In addition, these application-specific products became a very efficient vehicle to penetrate existing markets and to diversify into new emerging markets around the world.
In the mid-1990s, we achieved investment grade, which was, you know, considering quite an accomplishment considering where we came from.
Larry DeGeorge, longtime chairman and major shareholder, retired in 1997 after leading a remarkable transformation of the company.
He got the right people, he downsized the company, he disposed of bad product lines, he bought the right companies, he sold off the operations that were going nowhere like Seachem and underwater safety devices and the joint venture DDK and so forth. So it was a period of about a decade which he ran a no-nonsense business.
In May of 1997, Kohlberg, Kravis & Roberts acquired a majority interest in Amphenol, which remained a public company. Martin Luffler, Amphenol's chief executive officer, was appointed as chairman.
When we got involved with Amphenol, it really, in a lot of ways, was just beginning to mature as a company. It was on its own. The management had a interested, controlling shareholder. The focus was one of commonality and long-term perspective. They had the full support and capital of KKR behind them, and they really had an opportunity to strike out on their own and really begin or continue to put in place their vision of what Amphenol could be.
The leveraging in the 97 KKR transaction, not only were the terms better, we had revolver availability, and so there was always capital. There wasn't the same financial pressure that had earlier, and as well as going through better economic times.
It was coming off a good year, and it had very strong expectations. I remember, I think the year we bought the company, their revenues were about $770 million, and I remember Martin talking about his plans to take it to $1 billion and then $1.5 billion.
We capitalized on the emergence of new markets, such as the mobile communication and data communication markets, the information technology market, as well as the automotive electronics. We continued to develop application-specific products which helped our customers to build superior electronic equipment and network. That brought significant value to our customers and value to Amphenol.
The needs for connectors were expanding at a very rapid pace, and people would look more closely at some of these end markets and try to determine the growth, the size, the players, and suddenly Amphenol's name was appearing more often in some of these end markets.
Amphenol responded very strongly to the increasing globalization of our markets, and we accelerated our expansion in all regions of the world.
Lots of customers moved to China in the late 1990s, mid-1990s, late 1990s, And the smart suppliers position themselves to be local. And if you didn't keep the business.
We are well established today in Asia to take advantage of the growing opportunities in that part of the world. In fact, in China alone, we operate 17 manufacturing operations that gave us access to low-cost manufacturing, as well as to penetrate that growing market.
One of the things that we had observed during our early days of learning about the connector industry was how incredibly fragmented the industry is. I mean, the number of connector companies in the thousands, and clearly a fragmented industry provides real opportunity if you've got the right consolidator.
Building on the tremendous experience of KKR, Amphenol engaged in a very successful acquisition program.
What they did is acquire smaller companies that possess technologies and leverage them.
The companies that we acquired we could add a lot of value, either through the low-cost manufacturing sources and an additional customer base. We acquired tremendous management talent through this acquisition program.
We developed a very deep-seated culture of cost control, which was formed primarily during the early parts of the leverage buyout when the company had a tremendous debt load. We refined that strategy over time through very efficient operating disciplines and a very effective approach to investments.
They were able to sustain industry-leading growth and margins with a very judicious and effective use of capital. The returns of capital in the company are just unbelievable, without peer.
The company exceeded $1 billion in sales in 1999 while continuing to set new records for earnings per share. With its deep-seated culture of cost control, Amphenol expanded in low-cost regions, keeping the infrastructure in high-cost areas very lean. This investment strategy in favorable market conditions prepared Amphenol for the worst downturn in the history of the electronics industry.
With the internet bubble, lots of companies that I was following had tremendous changes in their business, and the abruptness affected the stocks dramatically. Amphenol, on a relative basis, performed substantially better. While the stock went down, it didn't go down as hard as the competition. And I think when you look back, investors always like to put money in the companies that perform the best in the worst of times.
Amphenol, again, really separated and distinguished itself through that period. The management was so far ahead of the curve in terms of responding to the changed market conditions. And in part it was just because it was really a continuation of what they always did. You know, they had already begun and continued to migrate into the low-cost jurisdictions, which was crucial. And they took the steps in anticipation of the changes.
Amphenol remained focused on its customers while many of our competitors were distracted with restructuring activities. That allowed us to gain significant market share during that downturn and return to growth 1 to 2 years before our competitors did.
2004 was another record year. Following a 2-for-1 stock split, Amphenol completed a secondary offering that resulted in a broader shareholder base as KKR phased out their investment. The company was added to the S&P 400 Mid-Cap Index and declared the first cash dividend in the company's history.
The time had come for us to get the money back to the investors. So we ended up exiting, I think in September of, I guess it was 2004, we sold our final shares in Amphenol. And it wasn't because we thought that the great Amphenol story was about to come to an end. In fact, we really felt that Amphenol's future was brighter than ever.
Amphenol closed 2005 with its largest acquisition ever, Teradyne Connection Systems.
The Teradyne acquisition was dynamite for Amphenol.
Amphenol has always been strong, really outside the box. I/O solutions, cabling solutions especially, power solutions, whatnot. But with the addition of TCS, it brings this added capability of high-speed, high-density interconnect really inside that box. We can really now offer our customers a complete solution. And this is really something that our competitors can't do.
The worldwide market for connectors in 1963-64 was 110 million. Today, this year, 41.5 billion. Of course, what happened is electronics has exploded into everything.
The past 10 years have been an extraordinary period for Amphenol. Our sales tripled over that period of time to reach a new record of $2.5 billion. Our earnings increased 8 times over that period of time, supporting a very, very strong increase of our stock price from about $6 10 years ago to over $60 by the end of 2006.
You know, we bought Amphenol for $1.5 billion. Today the market cap's $6 billion. So to quadruple the value of a company over a 10-year period of time is pretty phenomenal.
We have set for ourselves a new goal to reach $4 billion in sales and 10% market share over the next few years. And I'm confident that we can reach that goal as we can continue to rely on a very committed, experienced and loyal management team, and on a very talented and passionate workforce around the world.
Over the past 75 years, Amphenol has grown from a small molding laboratory in Chicago to a global corporation employing more than 25,000 people in 60 operations on 6 continents. The company survived its founding in the Great Depression and the volume collapse following World War II. Amphenol kept its identity and culture alive within 2 conglomerates. It was bought and sold half a dozen times, including 3 IPOs and 2 leveraged buyouts. It was heavily restructured, milked for cash, and saddled with debt, and successfully navigated dozens of business cycles, including the bursting of the internet bubble. Today, with a breadth of products that touch the lives of billions of people, Amphenol connectors help us defend our freedom, explore the galaxy, generate power, and discover natural resources. Our connectors physically link the world's communication networks and keep us in touch when we can't be plugged in. Amphenol interconnects bring movies, games, and digital content into our homes and help transport people and freight around the world by land, sea, and air, while keeping our families safe when driving around town. Amphenol's rich history has shaped the character of an organization that continues to pursue with passion its mission to connect people and technology.